Hey there, roosters. It's Sister Mary Clarence coming at you with books I've read so far this month, Part 1. So, the first book that I read in the month of April so far was Whatever Happened to Interracial Love by Kathleen Collins. And this was a book of the month pick that I chose. That's terrible phrasing. It's been on my TBR shelf for a while now, just never got around to it, but finally did, and a little disappointing. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Basically, it's a collection of short stories by Kathleen Collins, who was an African-American writer and activist in like the 60s and 70s. A lot of the stories feel really modern. If you told me that she was a modern writer, I wouldn't be surprised by that. So a lot of the things that she deals with are relationship based, so people meeting together in their lives at points where they're not on the same page, maybe not even reading the same book. They're just completely at different points in their life, and it's about their trying to fit together and eventually coming apart. That's a lot of what her stories focus on. It was a really mixed bag of stories, so some of them were really good. I really liked the language in it, I really liked the storytelling, but some of them were really dry, really dense. Some of the actual stories were almost like reading a play, like the beginning of a play when the playwright is trying to set the setting. Those short, choppy sentences that are like blah 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 blah. Wasn't for me. Definitely enjoyed some of the stories. I would go back and read some of them, so ended up giving it 3 stars. The second book that I read in the month of April so far was Roald Dahl's Boy. I love Roald Dahl. If you know anything about me, I love Roald Dahl. As a kid, I read all of his books. Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Can we just take a second and talk about Charlie in the Great Glass Elevator and how weird that book is? But this one is a memoir by Roald Dahl. He says in the beginning, in the prelude, that it is not a memoir, that he would never write a memoir, but it's a memoir. So he talks about stories from his childhood, so you learn about how he grew up, and you kind of get a feel for how he came up with a lot of the characters in his stories, just from him talking about his experiences, especially in school. So I gave this one 4 stars, and there actually is a sequel that I will be checking out soon. Did not realize that, but super excited to read another memoir by him. Oh, excuse me, not a memoir, sorry. The next book that I read in the month of April was Every Wild Heart by Meg Donahue, and so I won this on Goodreads, like 2 months ago maybe, and it's been on my TBR shelf, but I just have not got around to it. I really enjoyed the cover, and the spine is really pretty. It's nice and yellow. But basically this story follows a woman who is a single mom. She's divorced. She's a radio host, and so she talks a lot about love and independence and finding yourself like outside of marriage and that sort of thing. And so her daughter is a teenager. She goes horseback riding and ends up injuring herself. Her daughter hits her head on the ground, has a brain injury, and so her personality starts changing. So before she was really shy, she's starting to act differently. She's being more aggressive, more forthcoming. So this story is about that, about the mother and daughter relationship between the two. There is sort of like a thriller-ish subplot, but it's really not like the main focus of the book. It's kind of like a lighthearted, just summery, breezy read, so I enjoyed it, gave it 4 stars. I will be checking out other works from her because I did enjoy her writing. The next book that I read in the month of April was also a advanced reader copy of The Covens of Elmira by Miguel Lopez de Leon, and I also won this on Goodreads. Did not know much about the book or about the author, but I read the premise and it was about witches, and that's all you really need to reel me in. This one, unfortunately, did not enjoy it too much. I ended up giving it 2 stars, which is kind of rare for me. I just did not like the writing in the story. There were so many adjectives that were unnecessary. So at one point, the main character, who's a princess, is meeting the witches who have been banned from the kingdom, and he's describing the witches, and there's like a circle of them. He says things like, the mysterious witches, or the suspicious witches, or the unknown witches, just like over and over again, and it was literally in the same paragraph, probably like 6 words in front of witches to describe them. Just a lot of unnecessary writing there. I felt like it was a really short read, so probably just adding to the volume of the book. But the basic story I didn't mind. I enjoyed that. Some of the characters' names were kind of silly, like Queen Bloom. Just kind of felt like an afterthought. Overall, didn't like the writing, kind of enjoyed the story, so it's kind of a mixed bag. I gave it 2 stars. The next book that I read in the month of April was Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari, from Parks and Recreation, and also just as a stand-up comedian. So I went into this thinking that it was a memoir of short stories. So I'd recently read Mindy Kaling's new memoir, and then Clinton Kelly's also. So really enjoyed those. Thought I was getting into the same kind of thing here, but this is not a memoir. It's actually a sociological text, kind of, about modern romance, and so the ways that we interact with people in today's society versus generations from before, and also versus other cultures. I felt like a lot of this was just kind of information that I already knew, but maybe that's just because I'm in this generation when like we meet people online and sometimes it's overwhelming and we don't give people a chance. The writing was actually really good. It was entertaining. It wasn't dry or boring like I thought it very well could have been with this type of text. The one thing that I really did enjoy was when he started talking about other cultures. So he compares US modern romance to France, Barcelona, and then also to Japan. And I found that portion of the book really interesting. I would want to read more about that versus the stuff that he was just telling us about ourselves. The next book that I read in the month of April was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alir Science. I'm probably butchering that, I apologize. I had heard so many good things about this book just on like BookTube and Goodreads. It is a LGBT YA book about two boys, Aristotle and Dante, teenagers, who meet each other, become friends, start to have sort of feelings for each other. So I was really excited for reading this book and the premise of it. I thought it was really something that I would enjoy. But it kind of fell flat for me. Maybe I was just too hyped up about it, but I ended up giving it 3 stars. While I really enjoyed the story and the characters, I felt like the writing was kind of trying too hard sometimes. Like much in the same way that I thought Perks of Being a Wallflower kind of tried too hard sometimes. And it was one of those like similar writing styles where and the boy is saying, I'm sad, I'm mopey, I don't really understand why. I was just kind of let down by it altogether. I will still be reading his next book though that just came out. I have a copy of it on hold at the library, so still excited to read from him. I did really enjoy the character, so I might give it another chance and read it again at some point. The next book that I read was a collection of short stories. It's Adventure Time, Tales from the Land of Ooh. I really love Adventure Time. I have watched all the seasons. I really enjoy the characters. I love how weird it is, but I also like the depth to it, sort of like lessons about life and the way that we treat people, the way we interact with ourselves and others. So if you have not seen Adventure Time, definitely don't read the book because you need to know who the characters are and their personalities to appreciate it, because in the written format you have to have that subtext. But I did enjoy the book. It was alright. I gave it 3 stars. Some of the stories were okay. I didn't find them like particularly funny, but maybe just the visual of it really helps with the actual storytelling that is featured in the show. Wasn't mad that I read it. It was really short. It was only like 60 pages, so I definitely want to check out other ones. BMO! BMO is my favorite! The next book that I read in the month of April was Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. And this has been on my TBR shelf for so long. I've wanted to read this for an eternity. And I finally found this cover, which I really enjoy the layout of this. And so I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really enjoyed the characters. That was probably my favorite part of the book, was the characters and the character development and the relationships to each other. But one thing I did not enjoy was the description. It was so thorough. I did not realize how much of a thorough author Anne Rice is, but there are literally an entire page of paragraph describing the scene, and then a little bit of dialogue, and then more description. This one actually took me the longest to read. I read a lot of books while I was in the middle of this book, and so I finally had to sit down one day and say, Alan, finish this book today. Really enjoyed it. I am going to continue with this series because I really like her writing style and the characters. I did pick up the next one, which is The Vampire Lestat, so I will be reading that probably, I don't know, soon, but there's like 14 or so books in the series, so better get cracking. The next book that I read in the month of April was Anna Kendrick's Scrappy Little Nobody, and I thought it was good. I gave it like 3 stars, maybe 3.5. Wasn't my favorite memoir that I've read, and I've read a couple in the last couple of months. I enjoy her humor. I like Anna Kendrick as an actress, and I feel like she has a unique point of view, sort of that self-deprecating humor. But some of the stories were a little like boring. I was kind of just like, okay. So she talks a lot about her early career with independent films, and I haven't seen most of them. My favorite Anna Kendrick movie personally is The Last 5 Years. It's a musical. If you don't like singing, do not watch that movie because literally the entire movie is them singing. I was hoping she would talk about this in this book because it is one of my favorites. Unfortunately, she didn't. That was a disappointment to me. I still enjoyed it. The last 2 books that I read in the month of April were actually ebooks. So I found my old Kindle Fire in my closet that has been there for literally 10 years. It is old and clunky, but it works, and I found I had books on there that I did not remember buying. So first one that I read was Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion. And so I had seen the movie. It's been like years though. I probably only watched the like first half of it, because I definitely didn't remember anything that happened towards the end of this book. It basically follows a zombie named R who can't really remember his name. He just remembers the first letter, which is R. And he eats the brains of this girl's boyfriend, Julie. In the story, one of the zombies eats the brains. They remember the person's past. And so a lot of this story, we shift point of view from R and then from Perry, who is the boyfriend. And so we learn about his past, about the people living in this like zombie era, in this plague. So that part was kind of interesting. It was kind of confusing sometimes, not knowing if this was in the present or if this was in the past or if this was Perry or if this was actually R in the scene. Otherwise, I did enjoy the story. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And I'm also excited to continue on with this story. The second book just came out recently. I think it's called The Burning World. And there's also a novella in the middle of those two, which I have not read either. So I will be picking those up and continuing on with these characters. And the last book that I've read so far in the month of April was Ajax Penumbra 1969 by Robin Sloan. So this is the prequel to The 24-Hour Bookstore. It's a short little novella. Basically, it talks about Ajax Penumbra's past and how he came to be introduced into the 24-Hour Bookstore and his journey to find this like rare book. So I have not read The 24-Hour Bookstore, although now that I have read this, I am excited to finish it, and I actually bought it recently, so it is on my TBR shelf. Felt like there was enough development, enough characters introduced, that it didn't feel too short, it didn't feel too weighed down, so I enjoyed it. Ended up giving it 4 stars. I will continue on with this series soon. And that does it for the books that I've read so far in April. I have read a total of 11 books so far this month, which I think is like a personal best for me. I've been reading a lot of books lately. But let me know if you guys have read any of these books, or if you disagreed or agreed with any of my opinions on them. If you think I should give one of them another chance, let me know in the comments below. And I will see you in part 2. Peace!